Okay, so we are talking about the Chautauqua circuits and the movement from the Gentile book Cast of One. During this time period, it started to become a rise of one person shows, and it was also forming as a legitimate form of theater, basically meaning our perspective have changed toward theater during this time period. So we're rounding our frame back to talk about the 10th Chautauqua circuits. Basically, in 1904, it was, which is a very historical date, year, because during that period, it was development of the Chautauqua movement for one person shows in America. And they formed a touring Chautauqua, which brought a tent. Um, it was like a circus, a white bit circus tent that toured in different areas. So during that time, it was a way for the Chautauqua to be housed anywhere. And also, the two main people that were over it, which was Walter and Ellison, they used this theme to persuade communities to accept their program. But during that time period, Chautauqua eventually became a success after restructuring their program of the touring of the Chautauqua tents. And also, the attendance at vaudeville houses was also becoming more acceptable as a leisure activity. And this was for the middle class during the 19th century. On page 80 in the book, it states that the movement from the elocution to oral interpretation for the one person show changed professional solo performers. Um, so basically, it was no longer necessary for them to be trained in the field. Training as performers actually would come from theater schools and focus more on dramatic scripts during this time period. So during that moment, they would use training will be done in the circuits on stage. You learn how to do things while working in the field. But today, and then during that time period, also started to change or emerge where you would do basically your training as a performer in the school system. So it started to change for that. Also, I want to speak about William Sterling Bates. He's listed on page 82. He was an actor. He was basically he was an actor, a performer who helped change the elocution moment to conventional play acting, and it became a theatrical performance. He would do monologues and adaptations of Dickens novels. It basically led to Bates did start offering lectures to the Lyceum and Chautauqua circuits. On page 85, many of the Chautauqua and Lyceum performers began to incorporate theatrical elements such as adding folk songs or playing a guitar. During the 20th century, eventually, that's when they start offering full play productions after the theatrical or one person show became fully successful. And by 1925, that was during called the golden age of platform performers. And during that time, between 1925 and 1930, platform performers started to suffer from competition from play productions. And between 1920 and 1950, the performers' platform's name began to change and move to solo theater or solo performance. And Broadway during this time became the center of attention. During the transition period, which was between 1920 and 1950, That was when Ruth Draper, Charles Lawton, Cornelia Otis Skinner, Cecilia Loftus. All of these were major solo performers during this time frame. It was during the transition period after the World War One had ended, and that is when the transition from being just a regular platform performer, it changed to you becoming a solo performer. So these people that I just mentioned were big major solo performers during that time that actually incorporated acts and were merged into one person shows, but it was more of a theatrical performance for solo performers at that time. So I think those are very important details, and I was able to see how it changed throughout the time from being like in the circuit and changing from just a comedian style performer and then gradually changing into where it was accepted as a theatrical performer. So my question, I definitely would like to talk more about the phase of the process of how it merged into a more theatrical performance in plays. But I'm still kind of curious why people eventually change their perspective on theatrical performers and doing production plays. Why they consider it to be more acceptable now to do so versus from when it was staged as a regular performance as just a solo and then eventually transitioning into a regular play. So my question is, I'm still kind of curious and struggling with the fact, like, what really made the world change their perception and for it to be more acceptable for us, basically, within the world. I would like to discuss more about that in class. All right.